September 18th, 2019, Brookhaven, Ohio. Police entered a quiet suburban home and found a scene of controlled devastation. In the master bedroom, 36-year-old Claire Reynolds lay lifeless on the floor. She had been struck again and again, with a blunt object, the sheer force of the blows leaving investigators certain. This was no accident. Sitting in the living room only a few feet away was her husband, Daniel Reynolds. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He waited. When officers arrived, he stood and surrendered without a word. To outsiders, Daniel was the quiet husband, a factory worker, steady and predictable, known for keeping to himself. He had no history of violence, no record of trouble. But that morning, he reached his limit. Investigators quickly learned why. Claire's late nights were not overtime hours or errands. They were cover for an affair that had gone on for months in secrecy. While Daniel kept his suspicions to himself, the truth was quietly pushing him toward a breaking point. What began as a private betrayal would end in a homicide that shocked the town. The story of the Reynoldses wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the unraveling of a marriage, the collapse of trust, and the moment a quiet man's silence gave way to violence. This is the case of the affair that pushed a husband beyond restraint and ended with blood on the bedroom floor. Brookhaven, Ohio, was the kind of town where little changed from year to year. Rows of modest homes lined quiet streets, children played in the parks, and neighbors exchanged small talk over trimmed hedges. It was the kind of place where crime rarely made headlines. Daniel Reynolds fit perfectly into that picture. At 38, he worked long shifts at a local manufacturing plant. Known as reliable and punctual, his life was built on routine. He was the quiet man on the street, the one who waved politely but rarely lingered to talk. Friends described him as steady, if somewhat distant, a husband who provided without complaint. Claire Reynolds, at 36, was his opposite. Outgoing and sociable, she worked part-time at a local clinic and was often seen laughing with friends, attending community events, or volunteering. Together, the couple appeared ordinary, a stable marriage in a stable town. But behind that image, cracks were spreading. Claire's increasingly late nights were excused as extra hours and errands, explanations Daniel accepted without argument. To neighbors, nothing seemed unusual. But to investigators, the contrast between the quiet husband and the social wife would prove central to understanding how Brookhaven's calm was shattered in one violent night. On the night of September 17, 2019, Brookhaven was quiet. Streetlights cast long shadows across empty roads, and most homes were dark by 11 p.m. But inside the Reynolds residence on Birchwood Drive, tension had been building. Claire Reynolds returned home shortly before midnight. She had told friends earlier that evening she was working late, but her car had been seen parked in a nearby lot for hours. Daniel had been awake, waiting. The hours of suspicion, the late nights, the unexplained absences, all of it came to a breaking point. By the early hours of September 18th, the quiet home had become a crime scene. Claire was found in the master bedroom. Her body sprawled on the carpet, bludgeoned repeatedly with a blunt object later identified as a tire iron taken from the garage. Blood had pooled beneath her head and spattered onto the surrounding walls and bedding. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle with anyone outside the home. Everything pointed inward. At 6:58 a.m., a 911 call from a neighbor reported loud banging earlier in the night and an unusual silence from the Reynolds house by morning. When police arrived minutes later, they entered through the unlocked front door. Claire was discovered in the bedroom, lifeless, while Daniel sat in the living room. He showed no signs of resistance. Officers noted his clothes were stained, though. He made no attempt to clean them or leave the house. The initial scene suggested more than a spontaneous act of violence. The weapon, found neatly placed beside the bed, had been wiped clean of prints. The rest of the house was untouched. No ransacking, no theft, no attempt to fabricate a burglary. The crime was contained entirely to the couple's private space. Paramedics confirmed Claire had been dead for several hours. The coroner later estimated her time of death between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., aligning with the noises neighbors reported hearing in the middle of the night. Officers secured the property and began their work. Photographs documented blood patterns across the room, showing clear evidence of multiple strikes delivered with precision. The tire iron bore traces of blood in its grooves despite efforts to clean the surface. DNA would later confirm it matched. Claire's Daniel was detained at the scene. He neither confessed nor denied, providing minimal response to standard questions. Investigators immediately recognized that the case was unlikely to involve an intruder. No windows had been tampered with. The back door was bolted from the inside, and only Daniel and Claire had been in the house that night. News of the crime spread quickly through Brookhaven. By mid-morning, neighbors gathered outside the property, stunned to see police cars, crime scene tape, and the body of Claire Reynolds carried out on a stretcher. To them, Daniel had always been quiet, almost invisible. That he was now the prime suspect in a brutal homicide sent shockwaves through the community. The crime scene raised immediate questions. Why had Daniel not attempted to hide the body? Why? Had he remained in the living room, waiting? And why was the weapon left behind rather than disposed of? Detectives believed these details pointed not to a cover-up but to a breaking point, a deliberate act carried out after months of tension, followed by resignation. But investigators would not stop there. While the scene inside the house told part of the story, the truth of Claire's late nights would reveal the full picture. Her secret life outside of Birchwood Drive, concealed from most who knew her, would soon emerge as the key to understanding why this crime happened, and why. A quiet husband finally reached his limit. The investigation into the death of Claire Reynolds began immediately after her body was removed from the Birchwood Drive home. Detectives secured the property, cataloged evidence, and began reconstructing the timeline of events. Lead investigator, Detective Mark Sullivan, headed the case. Known for his methodical style, Sullivan focused first on eliminating possibilities. There was no sign of forced entry. All windows were intact, the back door secured, and valuables left untouched. This ruled out burglary. The weapon, a tire iron from the Reynolds' own garage, pointed directly to someone inside the home. Attention narrowed quickly to Daniel Reynolds. The coroner's report confirmed Claire had died between 1 and 2 a.m. She had suffered multiple blunt force impacts to the head, each delivered with considerable force. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she had been caught off guard. Toxicology results showed no substances in her system. The attack had been swift, brutal, and deliberate. Detectives moved next to Daniel. At the time of arrest, his clothing bore bloodstains consistent with high-velocity spatter. DNA analysis confirmed the blood was Claire's. Forensic experts concluded the stains could only have come from proximity during the attack, not from contact afterward. With physical evidence pointing directly at him, Sullivan began examining motive. Interviews with friends, neighbors, and co-workers quickly revealed a pattern. For months, Claire had been seen regularly out late at night. She explained it as work obligations or errands, but several witnesses reported seeing her in locations unrelated to her job. One colleague recalled Claire leaving early from shifts she claimed had kept her late. These inconsistencies drew detectives' attention to the possibility of an affair. Phone records confirmed it. Claire's call logs showed repeated late-night communication with a single number saved under a false name. Subpoenaed cell tower data revealed her phone frequently pinged from areas far from the clinic where she worked, often aligning with her claimed overtime hours. Surveillance footage from a downtown bar confirmed she had been meeting another man, later identified as Michael Carter, a 39-year-old salesman from a neighboring town. Michael admitted to the affair under questioning. He confirmed he and Claire had been seeing each other for nearly a year, often meeting late at night while Daniel was home. According to Michael, Claire assured him her husband was quiet, withdrawn, and unlikely to act on suspicion. This revelation gave investigators the missing link. Daniel's reserved demeanor, paired with Claire's secret double life, painted a clear picture of escalating tension. Detectives began reconstructing the days leading to the murder. On September 16th, 2 days before the crime, Claire had met Michael at a motel. Surveillance cameras documented their arrival and departure. On September 17th, Claire told coworkers she would be working late but never reported to her shift. Instead, her phone pinged near Michael's apartment. By midnight, she returned home where Daniel was waiting. Within hours, she was dead. Detectives presented Daniel with the evidence during formal interrogation. He refused to provide a statement, invoking his right to remain silent. His silence, combined with forensic results and Claire's affair, gave prosecutors a clear narrative. Daniel had discovered his wife's betrayal and killed her in a fit of rage. Financial records added another dimension. In the months before the murder, Claire had opened a separate bank account, unknown to Daniel. Investigators traced deposits from Michael Carter, suggesting he had been providing financial support. This detail strengthened the argument that Daniel may have felt pushed aside, his suspicions confirmed by both emotional and financial betrayal. Still, detectives avoided framing the case solely around jealousy. Their goal was to present facts. Daniel's presence at the crime scene, his clothing stained with Claire's blood, the absence of forced entry, the weapon from his own garage, and the timeline aligning perfectly with neighbors' reports, together, the evidence was overwhelming. By late October, the investigation was complete. Daniel Reynolds was officially charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors argued that the killing was premeditated. They pointed to the weapon being selected from the garage, the lack of defensive wounds indicating an ambush, and the deliberate strikes that showed clear intent to kill. As the case moved toward trial, one question remained for investigators. Had Daniel discovered the affair directly, or had he pieced it together through suspicion and surveillance? Either way, the outcome was the same. Claire Reynolds' hidden life had collided with her husband's breaking point, ending in her death. The investigation revealed the truth behind the closed doors of Birchwood Drive. What had looked like an ordinary suburban marriage was, in reality, a fragile union divided by secrets. And those secrets, once exposed, left behind bloodstains that told the story without words. By the time Daniel Reynolds was charged with first-degree murder, the case seemed straightforward. A quiet husband, betrayed by his wife's affair, reached his breaking point and killed her. But in the weeks that followed, new findings emerged. That added complexity, exposing hidden layers behind what appeared to be a simple domestic homicide. The first major revelation came from digital forensics. Detectives reviewing Claire's laptop discovered encrypted folders that contained emails and messages between her and Michael Carter. These exchanges revealed more than casual infidelity. They detailed discussions about leaving Brookhaven, starting over in another state, and even referencing Daniel's potential reaction if the truth came out. In one message, Claire mentioned that Daniel would never let her go easily. Investigators noted the significance. Not only had she planned a new life with Michael, but she also acknowledged the potential volatility of her situation. The second twist came from financial records. The joint Reynolds account had been drained of nearly $12,000 in the 3 months leading up to the murder. Daniel claimed no knowledge of the missing funds. Tracing the withdrawals, detectives discovered they were transferred into the secret account Claire had opened, where Michael's deposits were also recorded. This indicated Claire had been diverting family finances to support her separate life. Prosecutors believed this discovery may have intensified Daniel's breaking point, demonstrating not just betrayal of trust, but betrayal of shared resources. But the most startling development came from Michael Carter himself. Under further questioning, he admitted that on the night of the murder, he had expected to see Claire. According to cell tower data, his phone pinged within a few miles of the Reynolds residence around midnight. He explained he had been waiting for her in his car after she texted earlier that she would come by after finishing things at home. She never arrived. Hours later, she was dead. This placed Michael Carter in suspicious proximity to the crime scene. While investigators never tied him directly to the killing, the implication was clear. Claire had intended to leave Daniel permanently, perhaps that very night. Whether Daniel discovered this plan through evidence or confrontation remains unknown, but detectives believed the timing was not coincidence. Another shocking element emerged during forensic re-examination of the crime scene. Blood spatter on the tire iron revealed faint partial prints. Initial testing had overlooked them, but advanced imaging techniques identified characteristics matching Daniel's hands. While this confirmed what investigators already suspected, that Daniel had wielded the weapon, it eliminated any chance the defense could argue someone else had carried out the attack. Still, the defense attempted to introduce a twist of their own. During pretrial hearings, Daniel's attorneys argued that years of emotional neglect and humiliation constituted provocation. They suggested Claire's secret life, particularly her use of marital funds and her plans to abandon the family, drove Daniel into a temporary state of loss of control. Prosecutors countered that the careful choice of weapon, the multiple strikes, and the staging of the scene pointed to intent rather than impulsivity. As if the case needed more complexity, another revelation came from surveillance footage outside the Reynolds home. A neighbor's security camera captured a vehicle resembling Michael Carter's sedan driving down Birchwood Drive around 12:15 a.m., minutes before Claire's estimated time of death. While Carter insisted he had left the area, the footage contradicted his claim. Prosecutors stopped short of charging him as an accomplice, but his presence deepened the mystery of what exactly occurred in those final hours. For Brookhaven, these revelations shifted the narrative. What had started as a story of a husband pushed to his limit now seemed tangled in financial deceit, escape plans, and a possible love triangle confrontation. Though Daniel remained the primary suspect, questions lingered about whether Claire's choices and Michael's involvement created the precise conditions that ignited Daniel's final act of violence. By the time trial preparations concluded, the prosecution had reshaped their case. They no longer portrayed Daniel as simply jealous or enraged. Instead, they argued he was methodical, aware of Claire's betrayal, and fully prepared to carry out the killing once he realized she was planning to leave permanently. The discovery of encrypted files, missing money, and Michael Carter's suspicious proximity only reinforced the timeline of pressure building to a deadly climax. The defense, meanwhile, clung to the narrative of a quiet man who broke under extraordinary strain. They emphasized the lack of prior criminal history, his reputation as non-confrontational, and the possibility of emotional provocation. But with forensic evidence pointing squarely to Daniel and Michael Carter legally distanced from direct responsibility, the trial would center on whether Daniel's actions constituted premeditated murder or something less. The twists left no doubt in the community's mind. This was no ordinary case of domestic betrayal. It was the story of a woman preparing to abandon her marriage, a husband pushed into violent action, and a third party whose presence blurred the line between coincidence and complicity. For prosecutors, these revelations cemented their strategy. For the defense, they complicated an already uphill battle. The trial of Daniel Reynolds began in February 2021, 17 months after the murder of his wife, Claire. The courtroom in Brookhaven County filled daily with reporters, family members, and curious locals. For a town unaccustomed to violent crime, the proceedings became a focal point. The prosecution opened with a clear argument. Daniel Reynolds had planned and executed the murder of his wife after discovering her affair and financial betrayal. They framed it as premeditated, calculated, and deliberate. Prosecutors emphasized the choice of weapon from his own garage, the multiple strikes to Claire's head, and the evidence of staging, including the wiped tire iron. Jurors were presented. with photographs of the crime scene, blood patterns across the bedroom floor and walls, the positioning of the body, and the weapon found neatly beside the bed. Forensic experts testified that the blood spatter on Daniel's clothing proved close-range impact, eliminating any possibility that the stains came from contact after the attack. Digital evidence played a central role. The encrypted emails and hidden messages between Claire and Michael Carter revealed her plans to leave Daniel. Financial records showing diverted funds, along with the secret account, underscored betrayal beyond infidelity. Prosecutors argued these elements pushed Daniel past suspicion and into decision. They also introduced the neighbor's surveillance footage of Michael Carter's car near the Reynolds home, not as proof of his involvement, but to highlight the immediacy of Claire's attempt to leave, a trigger point for the killing. Defense countered by portraying Daniel as a man with no history of violence, pushed to the edge by years of humiliation and deceit. They claimed he acted in a sudden fit of passion upon learning of Claire's plan to leave permanently. Their goal was to reduce the charge from first-degree murder to manslaughter, arguing lack of premeditation. Witness testimony gave the jury a broader picture. Neighbors recounted late-night noises, including banging and unusual silence afterward. Co-workers described Claire's frequent excuses for missed shifts, aligning with her affair timeline. Michael Carter took the stand, admitting to the relationship, but denying any involvement in Claire's death. Prosecutors used his testimony to confirm the affair, while the defense attempted to cast him as a destabilizing presence in the Reynolds marriage. The prosecution's strongest moment came with the presentation of Claire's internet search history. Jurors saw searches for staging crime scenes, blunt force trauma versus falls, and how to clean fingerprints off metal. While the defense argued these could have been planted or misinterpreted, forensic experts confirmed the activity had been logged under Claire's account but during times she was known to be with Daniel. This tied the preparation directly to him. After 3 weeks of testimony, closing arguments crystallized the divide. Prosecutors insisted Daniel's actions fit the definition of premeditated murder, highlighting his deliberate use of the tire iron, the multiple fatal blows, and the cover-up efforts. The defense urged jurors to see Daniel as a man overwhelmed by betrayal, acting in a moment of uncontrollable rage rather than planned intent. The jury deliberated for 32 hours. On March 3, 2021, they delivered their verdict. Daniel Reynolds was guilty of second-degree murder. The decision reflected recognition of intent to kill but stopped short of labeling it fully premeditated. At sentencing, the judge acknowledged the complexity of the case. Daniel Reynolds was sentenced to 35 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence was read, broken only by sobs from members of Claire's family. For the community of Brookhaven, the verdict brought a measure of closure, though not peace. Many continued to debate whether Daniel's crime was a calculated act or the eruption of a man who had endured too much. The legal outcome provided finality, but the questions left behind lingered. Long after the gavel fell, the case of Daniel and Claire Reynolds revealed how quickly the appearance of stability can unravel behind closed doors. What began as a marriage in a quiet Ohio town ended in betrayal, violence, and a homicide that shook the community. Claire Reynolds lived a double life, outgoing, respected in public, but secretly planning a future with another man. Her late nights, hidden finances, and encrypted messages painted a picture of a woman preparing to leave everything behind. For Daniel Reynolds, those discoveries pushed years of silence into a single night of violence. The investigation was straightforward, but layered with shocking revelations. Forensics tied Daniel directly to the weapon. Financial records revealed betrayal deeper than infidelity. Surveillance footage placed Claire's lover near the scene, adding complexity that prosecutors used to strengthen their timeline. In the end, the jury concluded Daniel had acted with intent, though not with the full premeditation required for first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Michael Carter walked away without charges. Claire's family buried. A daughter and sister whose choices contributed to a chain of events with fatal consequences. And Brookhaven was left with the reminder that even the quietest homes can hide the darkest secrets. The affair that pushed a quiet husband to his breaking point became more than a story of betrayal. It became proof of how lies, once uncovered, can turn routine into tragedy. And it leaves one question. When trust collapses, how far can someone go before restraint is gone forever?